changes your life. Sometimes it just takes one offer. I'm Emma. I'm 30 years old. I was an ordinary married woman. My life was hard, but I was a decent person. I thought so. Until one night, a man offered me $50,000. Just one night, a one-night mistake. Doesn't make me an immoral woman, does it? But at that moment, there was something I didn't know. After I got that money, nothing would ever be the same. I was a different person. So, how did I get here? What led me down this path? And this is where my story begins. I'm Emma. I'm 30 years old. My long, wavy chestnut hair falls to my shoulders and my skin is always smooth. My light green eyes had a deep but cool gaze. Every outfit I wore revealed the perfect lines of my body. People turned their heads when they saw me. Women envied me. Men couldn't take their eyes off me. But the truth is, beauty alone means nothing. I thought beauty would bring me luck, but it didn't protect me. It didn't feed me. It didn't make me happy. On the outside, everyone envied me, but no one knew who I really was. No one knew the questions I asked myself in the mirror when I came home in the evenings. My marriage was presented to me like a fairy tale. My husband Daniel was the man who once promised me the world. When he met me, there was passion in his eyes, as if all he wanted was to make me happy. But over time, everything changed. In the first years, everything was fine. I was in love with him, and he with me. But as time passed, he started to lose interest. First, he started forgetting small details. Then, he gave all his attention to his work. By the time he came home in the evening, we had nothing to talk about. His eyes, which once looked at me with admiration, were now locked on the TV or the phone screen. Did he still love me? Or had I, too, become the background music of his life? And then, financial difficulties began. Debts piled up, credit cards maxed out, Daniel lost his job, and after a while, he just stayed at home and did nothing. He spent his days in front of the TV with a beer bottle in his hand. I, on the other hand, worked every day to survive. I worked as a waiter in the bar of a luxury hotel, serving the women who came every day dressed in diamonds, the men who sipped expensive whiskey, the customers who smiled politely when they saw me, but ignored people like me. Sometimes one of them would compliment me. "What beautiful eyes you have. Why don't you go to a better place instead of working in this hotel?" But nothing ever changed. In the evening, I'd go home, and Daniel would be on the couch. The place is a mess. The bills are still unpaid. Every night I would fall asleep with the same thought. Don't I deserve better than this? That night, when I was lost in these thoughts, I saw him. That night, everything changed. That night, working under the dim lights of the hotel, I saw him for the first time. Victor DeLuca. The moment he stepped into the room, the energy changed. People began to whisper softly. The waiters unconsciously became more attentive. He ignored it all and walked slowly towards the bar. He was tall, his dark hair perfectly combed. The first 2 buttons of his shirt were undone. He wore a smart suit without a tie. Every detail, from his watch and shoes to the bracelet on his wrist, showed that he had planned everything down to the last detail. He was not an ordinary rich man, but that wasn't the only thing that made him different. His eyes. He was watching me with a calm but menacing expression. Most customers would have ordered their drinks and gone off to their own conversations, but Victor DeLuca was studying me. He was weighing things. After a while, a waiter's voice came from behind me. "Emma, the customer in the corner wants to buy his drink from you." It wasn't a strange request. I knew I attracted most male customers, but I still felt a strange stirring inside me. I turned my head slightly to look. Victor was leaning comfortably back in his chair, swirling the glass of whiskey he held in his hand in slow motion. When his eyes locked on mine, a slight but confident smile appeared on his face. I didn't know what he was trying to do, but it was part of the job, so I held my head high, took a deep breath, picked up my tray, and walked over to his desk. Little did I know at that moment that my life would never be the same again. When I approached his table, he didn't take his eyes off me for a moment. He was so relaxed, as if it was the most natural thing in his life to sit here and wait for me. As I put my tray on the table, he got to the point without hesitation. "I asked you to serve because I want to see everyone's faces, to know everything about this place. I need to have an opinion about everyone." His voice was deep and calm, choosing each word carefully. I looked up slightly as he poured his whiskey into the glass. "Is that so? Then is there anything else you want to know about the hotel, Mr. I noticed the slight flicker in his eyes. I was testing the limits, but he seemed to enjoy it. "DeLuca," he said. "But names are unimportant. There are ways to understand people better." I lifted the wine bottle and touched his whiskey. "And what did you learn about me?" He smiled. "Very little yet." I held out my hand, ready to take the tray and walk away, when his voice stopped me. "Emma." There was something strange about the way she said my name. I turned to her slowly. "Do you know me?" Her smile got a little deeper. "No, I don't. but I will. I felt that this moment had lasted strangely too long. I wouldn't have had a conversation like this with a normal customer, but Victor DeLuca was not normal. Somehow he already seemed to have the upper hand over me. I bowed my head slightly and replied with a distant smile, "Good evening to you, Mr. DeLuca," and I turned and walked away. But even as I left, I couldn't deny the weight of his gaze on my back. That night, I realized he was interested in me, but what I didn't know was that he had already found out everything about me. When I opened my eyes in the morning, the silence in the house hit me like a heavy stone. Daniel wasn't with me, but that was nothing new. I sat up in bed and looked at my watch. How many mornings had I woken up thinking about overdue bills? How many nights had I fallen asleep without finding a solution? I went into the kitchen and saw Daniel sitting in front of the TV. Not even breakfast in front of him, just a beer in his hand at this early hour of the morning. He thought he had put it down hard on the table so it wouldn't make any noise, but I had noticed. I took a deep breath and went into the kitchen. "Daniel, the bills are still unpaid. The electricity is about to be cut off. The credit cards are maxed out. We can't even make the rent." Daniel didn't even take his eyes off the TV. "Emma, I don't want to deal with this in the morning." I put my hands on the table, trying to suppress my anger. "You don't want to deal with it? This is our life, Daniel. I work every day. I take care of you. I do everything on my own. What do you do? Nothing." At that moment, he turned his eyes to me. There was still a look of indifference in his eyes. "I'm not doing anything?" He put the beer bottle aside and gave a mocking laugh. "I'm working, Emma, but things are bad right now. There's no need for you to panic so much." "I'm panicking?" I couldn't control my voice. "Daniel, I work every day. How can I not panic when the debts are piling up?" He crossed his arms and shook his head. "If you're that uncomfortable, quit. We'll find a way." At that moment, something inside me snapped. I realized I was with a man who took no responsibility for his own life. "We'll figure it out, right?" I whispered. I squeezed my hands and took a deep breath. "You know what, Daniel? I'm so tired of having this conversation with you. You don't really want to find a solution, you just want time to pass. But I don't want to wait anymore." I turned around and he murmured behind me as I walked out the kitchen door, thinking I hadn't heard him. "Sometimes you overreact, Emma." When I heard that sentence, all the anger and frustration inside me was about to explode like a volcano. But I didn't turn to him and say anything, because there was no point in talking to him anymore. I grabbed my coat and closed the door hard and went out to go to the hotel. When I got to work, I was trying to clear my head. I went into the kitchen, got my coffee, looked in the mirror. I had black circles under my eyes from exhaustion. I felt like an idiot, and worst of all, I was stuck. I took a deep breath and stepped into the luxurious lobby of the hotel. I had to focus on my work, but at that moment, my eyes involuntarily searched for him. Victor DeLuca. He was sitting in his usual place in the corner, but this time it was different. This time he seemed to be waiting for me. His eyes were directly on me, just like last night. One of the waiters approached me. "Emma, DeLuca wants you to serve again." Normally I wouldn't have minded, but this time there was a strange nervousness in me. I took a deep breath and looked up before looking at him. Victor was sitting there, as if patiently waiting for me to step in. I slowly picked up the tray and made my way to his desk. This time I had prepared myself. When I placed the glass in front of him, his voice was deep and clear. "What kind of morning is it?" I squinted my eyes slightly. "I just started my workday, Mr. DeLuca." He smiled. "Me too." Without taking his eyes off me, he gestured to the chair next to him. "Sit down." I hesitated for a moment. This was my workplace. But he spoke so naturally, as if it would be disrespectful to refuse to sit down. When I sat down, his voice lowered even more. He studied me closely, was silent for a while. And then he spoke clearly. "I'll give you $50,000, one night, in exchange. I want you to be real." Victor's words hung in the air. "I give you $50,000, one night, in exchange. I want you to be real." My whole body tensed. My heart was beating like crazy. This had to be a joke. I blinked my eyes, opened my mouth, but no words came out. Finally, I pulled myself together and found my voice. "Are you serious?" Victor bowed his head slightly without hesitation. "I'm serious." A million trillion things went through my mind at that moment. How was such an offer possible? Why was he offering me something like this? We had only met last night. The questions in my mind poured out of my lips. Why me? Victor raised his glass, not taking his eyes off me. "Don't get me wrong, Emma. It's not a matter of luck. I didn't choose you by chance. I watched you. I know who you are, how you live, how you struggle." My whole body flinched. "Did you investigate me?" Victor smiled slightly, but it was a smile without warmth. "I don't trust anyone, Emma. I don't know what you think, but I'm not that kind of woman." There wasn't even a hint of surprise on Victor's face. "Are you really?" For a moment I didn't know what to say. There was a great conflict inside me at that moment. I should have said no. I should have stood up decisively and turned around and walked away. But Victor intervened. Look, there's no need to rush. Let me tell you how it's going to be. He put his whiskey on the table, leaned forward, and continued speaking in a low voice. This isn't just a physical deal, Emma. I want a real night. I'm not buying this night. I want to live it. He caught me with his eyes, but I was still trying not to react. Tonight we will have dinner together in a nice restaurant. His voice was determined. We will spend the whole night together. You'll get your money in advance, and if you don't want to, you can end the night after dinner. Victor's words hung in the air. We'll spend the whole night together. You'll get your money in advance, and if you don't want to, you can end the night after dinner. My heart was racing. Countless thoughts were running through my mind. Could I really agree to this? I stared at Victor, and he was relaxed, as if he already knew my answer. Why was he doing this? When a man makes such an offer to a woman, it's usually clear from the start what he wants. But Victor was leaving it up to me to decide. It wasn't something I could fully trust. But at the same time, he was so sure and calm, it was hard to resist. $50,000. Just one meal. And then if I got up and left, nothing would happen. I'd have your money, and I'd be out of this debt. So I started, sounding calmer than I thought I would. All I have to do is have dinner with you. And I get $50,000? Victor tilted his head slightly. Yes. He said it so clearly and confidently that I had a strange feeling. I did an internal calculation. What would I lose? Eating didn't make anyone immoral. It was up to me to get up and leave afterwards. If that was really an option, why not take it? I bit my lip, averting my eyes from him. Is it really that easy? Victor smiled slightly, but it was not a smile of triumph. Rather, it was an expression that said he knew exactly what I was thinking. I don't like things that are easy, Emma, but I like things to work within the rules. He was weighing his words. He was playing a game, but I knew the rules of this game. I narrowed my eyes and looked at him. Why me? I asked this question one more time because I really wanted to know the answer. After a short silence, Victor shrugged his shoulders slightly. When I first entered the hotel and saw you, Emma, you surprised me with your innocence and grace. I felt a stirring inside me. It was a very special feeling, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. Yes, I knew I was beautiful, but here was a man standing in front of me after all these years with words that made me feel like a woman. And this man was a very powerful, charismatic man, and he was offering me money I would never earn in my life, just to have dinner with me. I breathed slowly. Okay, Victor smiled with a slight tilt of his head. I'll call them to pick you up at 8 in the evening. I was still hesitating, but I couldn't change the words that came out of my mouth. He didn't take his eyes off me for a moment as he stood up. See you then, Emma. And without looking back, he walked out of the lobby with heavy steps. I froze in my seat. I stared after Victor. When evening came, I was still undecided. It was approaching 7:30 p.m. and I felt a strange uneasiness. I got up from the armchair and approached the mirror. I didn't have my makeup on yet. My hair was disheveled, but there was a slight stirring in me, and just as I was thinking about what to wear, there was a knock at the door. I froze for a moment. My heart started beating fast. I walked slowly to the door and opened it slowly. There was an employee of the hotel standing in front of me. He was holding a large, luxurious box. Was DeLuca sent your outfit for tonight? My eyes widened. Victor! Had he picked out clothes for me? As I took the box in my hand, the man bowed and walked away without saying anything. I closed the door and looked at the box. Not knowing what to think, I untied the ribbon. Out of the box came a silky, elegant, but incredibly bold outfit. It was ice blue in color, tight enough to fit my body, with a boldly deep cleavage and an incredibly elegant mini-cut that revealed my legs. It was accompanied by high-heeled shoes with thin straps that matched the dress and a small bag in the same color. I gasped for a moment. What was Victor trying to do? Was he giving me orders by sending me this outfit? Or was he just setting the rules for the evening? For a moment I felt the fabric of the dress with my hand. This dress was expensive. It's very expensive. I knew I shouldn't hesitate for a moment, but still, a note fell out of the box. I chose this for you. I hope you like it. Victor. These words left a strange warmth in me. Holding the dress in my hand, I looked at myself in the mirror. I was not going to forget this moment. I was making a choice, and wearing this outfit would mean that I was really getting into the game. Taking a deep breath, I took off my clothes and carefully slipped the dress on, when the silky fabric fit my body perfectly, something changed inside me. I threw my shoulders back. My cleavage was on full bold display. The mini cut of the dress made my legs look even longer than they were. The fabric hugged my every curve perfectly. Was this me? Immediately afterwards, I wore my hair wavy and applied a light but impressive makeup on my face. I defined my eyes and applied a bright but alluring red to my lips. I took one last look in the mirror and I didn't recognize me. The woman standing in front of me was not the old Emma. I sighed deeply as I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes misted over. Just then I heard the sound of an engine outside. It sounded like Victor's car coming from downstairs. The game had begun, and now I was in this game. When I stepped out, I saw that long black limousine again at the entrance of the hotel. The driver opened the back door. I felt a slight tremor inside, but I didn't show it. The strange thing, even for me, was that I didn't think of turning back anymore. I took a deep breath and got into the car. When the door closed, Victor's eyes were on me. He looked me up and down. For the first time, I saw a faint flicker in his eyes. The man who normally planned everything in advance, who was unaffected by anything now. He paused for a moment, and then he bowed slightly. "You look perfect, Emma." A strange warmth came over me, but I knew I shouldn't lose my temper. I smiled slightly at him. "I thought you already knew that." Victor smiled slightly, but the charismatic hardness on his face didn't disappear. I knew, but seeing is always different. He nodded slightly to the driver without taking his eyes off me, and the car started moving. The night was beginning, but I still didn't know where this night would take me. When the car stopped, the door opened and I stepped out. When I looked up, my eyes widened in admiration. This was not just a restaurant. It was a special place that towered just above the city lights, surrounded by glass walls, giving the feeling of touching the sky. The waiters who greeted us at the door recognized Victor immediately. They directed us to the most private section. Victor gently extended his arm to me. I hesitated for a moment, but then I accepted, with a slight smile. When we stepped inside, the whole world fell silent. Elegant crystal chandeliers, dim candlelight, a lavish yet elegant setting where every detail was perfectly designed. But I only had eyes for Victor. I had entered his world. And that night, for the first time, I really felt something. When we sat down at our table, Victor's gaze was on me. "Tonight will be real, Emma," he said, locking his eyes on mine. I felt a slight shudder inside me, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. After a while, our champagne glasses arrived. Victor raised his glass slightly. "Tonight, to forget the past and just enjoy the moment. For you," he added, without taking his eyes off me. Something stirred inside me. I raised my glass and touched it lightly to him. Then, for tonight. When I took the first sip, even the warmth of the champagne was not as effective as Victor's gaze. When the meal began, Victor was in control, as always. He placed the orders without even looking at the menu. The waiters moved without asking anything. He dominated the place. And me? For the first time, I was letting a man really dominate me. "No, it's a game," my inner voice screamed. But another part of me, "Let yourself go," and I silenced my inner voice for the first time in a long time. The more I talked to Victor, the more I understood him. He was no ordinary man. He was a strong man who chose his every word carefully, who read people. But there was something else. He really saw me. He was doing something Daniel never did. He felt me. I don't know how the time passed, but before I knew it, the sweets were gone. I was lost in the magic of the night. Victor took the last sip of his wine and looked directly into my eyes. "That's it," he said slowly. I tilted my head slightly. "What?" His smile was light, but deep. Reality. I trembled inside. But he went on. "I know what you were thinking when you first came, Emma," he said. "It's just a meal, isn't it? It was just a meal." I took a deep breath, but Victor tilted his head to the side and smiled slightly. "But now you know." He weighed his words. This was never just a meal. And at that moment, I realized the whole reality. It wasn't just a meal. This was not just an offer. It was a transformation. He watched me, I thought. And then, putting his hand on the table, he whispered softly, "We're going to the hotel, Emma." Just 2 words, but it created a whirlwind inside me, and I nodded without hesitation. It was no longer about money. This was no longer just a matter of one night. This was something that brought me back to life, and I didn't want to stop it. When I got into the limousine, I felt both fear and excitement. When I sat next to Victor, he stared into my eyes without touching me. "You want this too, don't you?" he asked. "Do I?" I was storming inside. But I couldn't lie to him. "Yes," I whispered. And at that moment, Victor bowed his head slightly. "Then you'll never forget this night, Emma." And the limousine sped off into the night. I was about to become a completely different woman that night. The moment I walked through the hotel door, Victor's presence filled the air. He hadn't said a word yet, but he had me in his gaze. As soon as I closed the door, he suddenly pulled me to him. When his warm skin touched my body, all the resistance in me shattered. I thought nothing. I didn't question anything. I just felt. When I felt his hands on my body, a fire awoke inside me that I had forgotten for years. He pulled me to him and closed his mouth on mine like a hungry man. He pulled that silk dress off me and tore all my underwear to shreds like a lion, bringing to the surface the lust that had been sleeping inside me. It was no longer a game. It was an explosion. Neither of us could stop. I was letting out all the passion, the desire, the need that I had kept inside me for years. I wanted to tear Victor apart. He was moving me around the room like a toy. I was experiencing this pleasure. I don't know if it was the fire that had been building up inside me for years, but I was enjoying it. Victor's touch knew no boundaries. He was breaking all the boundaries I had set for myself, one by one. I wanted him, until the morning, over and over again, hour after hour. Neither of us could get enough of each other. As our bodies melded together, all thoughts faded from my mind. This wasn't just one night. It was the beginning of a night I'd never experienced in my life. And Victor, he put me in such a state that I gave him control of everything. When I opened my eyes, my head was spinning. My whole body was still burning from Victor's touch. But the most striking thing was that Victor was still there. The room was lit by the morning sun. Victor was lying on his back on the bed. One arm was on the pillow. His chest was heaving, and his body was bruised and scratched, as if he had been in a fight. What had I done? He looked perfect. And I was realizing what I had done. What was I doing here? I spent the whole night with him. How many times? How many hours? I didn't know, but all I knew was that I was a different woman. I got up and went to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror. I didn't recognize myself. My eyes were bright. My skin was still flushed with excitement. My lips were swollen. But all the pallor and tiredness was gone from my face, as if I had been reborn. But I had a strange feeling inside. Happiness? Guilt? I couldn't decide which. I rubbed my hand over my face and took a deep breath. I stopped for a moment and saw the envelope folded on the edge of the bed. The money Victor gave me last night. $57. Money to pay off all my debts, the thing that made all this possible. And in that moment, I really understood what it all meant. When I got home, I was seething with anger, but my anger wasn't at Victor. It was at Daniel. When I opened the door, I stepped inside and looked around. The living room was the same. The furniture was disorganized. There were empty beer bottles on the table. And Daniel? He was still sitting on that couch. His eyes were still fixed on the TV. When he saw me, he looked up, but he didn't ask anything. He didn't ask what I was wearing. He didn't even realize I hadn't been home until morning. As if nothing had happened, he turned his head away and continued to watch the TV without a care in the world. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I had spent the whole night in the arms of another man. And my husband didn't even care. He didn't worry about me. He didn't even notice. And at that moment, all my anger shifted. I reached into my pocket. I took out that envelope and I threw it in front of Daniel. "Take it. Pay your debts." Daniel took the envelope in surprise and opened it. His eyes widened when he saw the money inside. He looked at me. "Emma, what is this?" I looked at the puzzled look on Daniel's face. He was still trying to make sense of the money in his hand. "Emma, what is this? Where did you get all this money?" I stared at him. I wasn't going to tell him everything. She didn't deserve that. I took a deep breath and crossed my arms over my chest. "I found a solution, Daniel. Isn't that all that matters to you? Paying off our debts. You can breathe easy now." My voice was so calm that I wondered how I could stand like this. Daniel squinted his eyes. There was doubt in him, but at the same time, he was mesmerized by the money. He looked at the money in his hand, then at me, but in the end, he didn't ask anything. I knew he wouldn't, because he didn't really want to know. And I retreated to my room with a storm inside me. I went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Who was I? What happened tonight? Victor's touches, his looks, his words, and most importantly, what it made you feel. The lure of money was one thing, but what about my feelings? Was it only beautiful with Victor? Was this life, this way of making money, only with him so fascinating? Or was where this path would take me so different? As these questions echoed in my head, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and my heart raced. Victor. I opened the message. Tomorrow night, same number, Kerr. Want to win? Something stuck inside me. I wanted to say yes without thinking. $50,000. Again. But a second later, the second message came. But not with me this time. With my friend Jesus. My whole body flinched. What? I stared at the screen. My heart was beating like crazy. This was something else now. I had to make a choice. Last night, it was different, but now, was there a way back? The storm inside me was getting bigger and bigger. And at that moment, I realized that I had really reached a turning point. What was I supposed to do now? I took this money once. What about the second time? If you do it once, do you do it all the time? Accepting it a second time would have changed the color of this business completely. How would you respond to this message? Share with me in the comments. And if you want to see more of this story, don't forget to subscribe.
That night, Jack asked me, "Are you happy?" I never thought such a simple question would shake me so deeply. I truly didn't know if I was happy. But the silence that followed his question made me feel that everything had already changed. What I'm about to tell you will show you how that question turned my whole life upside down. When I married Mark, I believed the dreams we built together would last forever. For the first few years, everything was just as I had imagined. We had a beautiful home, a sweet family, and from the outside, we looked like we had a perfect life, but that image was hiding the truth. Mark's workload had increased. At first, I tried to be understanding, even thinking that his hard work was for our future. But over time, I realized I wasn't a priority for him anymore. When he came home exhausted from work, he would barely say a few words to me, and often took refuge in alcohol. Alcohol had become Mark's escape while he was escaping. I was drowning in loneliness. Mark no longer touched me. I started questioning my worth as a woman. I kept asking myself, where did I go wrong? I found myself drowning in deep loneliness. I began to feel so terrible that I couldn't even breathe. At that point, I realized I needed someone to share this loneliness with. And that person turned out to be Jack. Meeting Jack was completely coincidental. One night, while browsing the internet, I entered a support forum. I just wanted to talk to a stranger. And that's when Jack's message appeared. "Hello, I want you to know you're not alone." That sentence created a warmth inside me. At first, I didn't want to reply to him, but I thought talking would make me feel better. Just talking and being able to breathe led me to start a conversation with him. No one had comforted me in such a simple yet heartfelt way in a long time. Jack was also struggling in his marriage. He too had lost the bond with his wife and was living a lonely life. At first, our conversations were quite ordinary. We talked about our children, work, and daily life. But over time, our conversations became deeper. Jack started asking me questions. "Are you truly happy?" or "What do you want?" These questions brought out emotions I had buried for so long. I began to feel a renewed zest for life. I started feeling like a woman again. My body was almost trembling with excitement, and I felt butterflies in my stomach. I began to desire him like crazy. Jack saw me. Truly, I felt valued when I was with him. Everything Mark had ignored for years came alive again in Jack's words. My conversations with Jack became the center of my life. I would check my phone as soon as I woke up in the morning to see his messages. Throughout the day, I constantly thought about the things he said. He gave me everything I needed: attention, love, and understanding. One day when he said, "I want to see you," his proposal both thrilled and terrified me. I was so excited to meet him. How would that moment go? How should I act toward him? How would he act toward me? While thinking about these, I couldn't suppress the feminine feelings bubbling up inside me. On the day of the meeting, I couldn't sit still from excitement. When I saw him at the cafe for the first time, the warmth in his eyes erased all my fears. We talked for hours. But the tension beneath our conversations hinted that everything was about to become much deeper. When we left the cafe and got into his car, the atmosphere completely changed. We were sitting in silence, but the silence was so intense that words were unnecessary. Jack moved closer to me, our eyes met, and at that moment I forgot the whole world. When our lips touched, a passion I hadn't felt in years awoke inside me. His hands moving across my skin brought out feelings I had suppressed for so long. In the car, I couldn't pull my lips away from his for hours. Unable to hold back any longer, we decided to find a place to be together. That night, in a hotel room, Jack and I shared hours of passionate moments. As soon as we entered the room, he tore off my clothes. Throwing me against the walls, he brought me to the peak of womanhood that I hadn't felt in years. His touch made me feel like a woman again. But this wasn't just a physical connection. Jack was touching my soul. He was taking me on a dream tour of pleasure. After that night, nothing was the same. Jack had become an indispensable part of my life. I couldn't stop desiring him. I kept making excuses to meet him. Being with him, experiencing physical and emotional pleasure, I couldn't stop myself anymore. I felt like I couldn't breathe without him. With each meeting, we bonded even more. With each meeting, our fantasies became wilder and more thrilling. Jack and I didn't just meet in hotel rooms, we met in park corners, bar restrooms, on the beach, and in hidden places. Being with him felt like forgetting the whole world. But behind this happiness, the guilt never left us alone. One day, Jack said, "I wish I had met you earlier." These words made me both happy and deeply sad, because we both knew this relationship would have an end. This relationship, with all its excitement, pleasures, and fears, lasted for months. One day, Jack said, "We can't do this anymore." The pain in his eyes shattered me. But he was right. This relationship was slowly destroying us. Our children, our spouses, and the chaos created by this forbidden love were leading our lives to a dead end. That day, we said goodbye to Jack. When I got into his car, knowing we would never see each other again broke my heart. After that, I cried for days. Every time I checked my phone, I hoped for a message from Jack, but that message never came. Living without him felt like losing a part of myself. But there was another truth: this relationship was ruining us. I knew this. Still, forgetting him was impossible. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I didn't know what to do. I felt so helpless. Today, I still think about Jack. It's true that I loved and desired him, but I have to accept that everything we experienced was wrong. Even so, in those moments I felt alive. Now I ask you, if you can't find the love you need in a relationship, is it wrong to look elsewhere? Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening to my story. That night, Jack asked me, "Are you happy?" I never thought such a simple question would shake me so deeply. I truly didn't know if I was happy. But the silence that followed his that everything had already changed. What I'm about to tell you will show you how that question turned my whole life upside down. When I married Mark, I believed the dreams we built together would last forever. For the first few years, everything was just as I had imagined. We had a beautiful home, a sweet family, and from the outside, we looked like we had a perfect life. But that image was hiding the truth. Mark's workload had increased. At first, I tried to be understanding, even thinking that his hard work was for our future. But over time, I realized I wasn't a priority for him anymore. When he came home exhausted from work, he would barely say a few words to me, and often took refuge in alcohol. Alcohol had become Mark's escape while he was escaping.
I'm Olivia. I'm 29. I have long, wavy brown hair. My skin is porcelain smooth, and my green eyes are my greatest weapon. Most people find me attractive. Others say I'm dangerously attractive. My beauty always seemed like an advantage, but sometimes it can be a curse. Today, I'm going to tell you about the biggest mistake of my life. How one decision, one night, changed my whole life. I was happily married. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. My husband Daniel was a successful businessman. People admired him, and so did I once. But over time, something started to slip in our relationship. Work became more important to Daniel than me. Even when he came home in the evenings, his mind was always somewhere else. Even if he talked to me, I didn't feel like he was really listening, and I started to feel more and more alone. Then that night came. A weekend getaway in Las Vegas. I thought it would be an opportunity to have some fun, to relax, maybe find myself again. I went with my friends. Everything started as it should. But then, I met this guy, Adrian. He was just a stranger, at least for that moment. But little did I know, that man would change my life forever. Vegas, twinkling lights, resounding laughter, the smell of alcohol in the air, and adrenaline. It was a city where people from all corners of the world flocked to experience their wildest, bravest, most unforgettable nights. That night, I was one of them. I had come here at the insistence of my friends, but I felt empty inside. Daniel's neglect of me, the fact that my marriage was just a habit, I didn't want to think about that. I just wanted to be Olivia that night. I wore a red backless mini dress that fit my body perfectly, showing off all my curves perfectly. It was a city where people from all corners of the world flocked to experience their wildest, bravest, most unforgettable nights. That night, I was one of them. I had come here at the insistence of my friends, but I felt empty inside. Daniel's neglect of me, the fact that my marriage was just a habit, I didn't want to think about that. I just wanted to be Olivia that night. I wore a red backless mini dress that fit my body perfectly, showing off all my curves perfectly. I wore no underwear. I wanted to be Olivia with my whole being. My makeup was bolder than usual. My long, wavy brown hair fell over my shoulders, and my stiletto heels made my steps more confident. When we entered the bar, it was as if I had stepped onto a stage. There was dim lighting, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, giving the place a luxurious but dark atmosphere. People were having fun, dancing. Some were just having a drink and enjoying the night. When I stepped inside, all eyes were on me. I was used to it, but one look, it was different from the others. In the corner of the bar, standing apart from the others, was a man. Tall, dark hair, dressed in a perfectly cut suit but without a tie. The first two buttons of his shirt open. He had a dangerous but attractive air. His eyes were locked directly on me. Cold, calculating, and eerily confident. I looked, but I didn't look away immediately because there was a part of me that didn't want to avoid that look. It was watching me, like a hunter staring at his prey, and I wasn't afraid to be the prey at that moment. When I sat at the bar, my friends were laughing and chatting. As the waiter poured the drink in front of me, I saw out of the corner of my eye that Adrian was still looking at me. In the crowd, I felt as if there was an invisible thread between us, and strangely, I didn't want to break it. When I finished my first drink, the waiter brought me another glass of wine. I frowned. I hadn't ordered. I heard that deep, smooth voice behind me. "You seem to want to discover yourself tonight. Would you like me to help you?" Goosebumps rose on my skin. His voice was close to my ear, but strong enough to make my skin tremble without touching it. I turned my head and looked into his eyes. His eyes had the darkest spot in the night. I didn't know who this man was, but I knew exactly what he wanted from me. He didn't ask my name, I didn't ask his, because this wasn't an introduction. This was the beginning of a game. The drinks were flowing like water. The waiter didn't ask anything. The drinks came to our table by themselves. When Adrian spoke, his voice overrode everything. The music, the laughter of the people, even the waiter's walk. He drew me to him in a way I can't explain. He was not an ordinary man. He was someone who made every move consciously, and I was dissolving more and more in his hands. At one point, Adrian held out his hand to me at the bar. "Let's dance." It wasn't a question. It was a command. There was a voice inside me telling me to run away, but my body had already silenced it. When he took my hand, the warmth of his fingers penetrated me. When we moved with him to the dance floor, people were now just shadows. When he put his hands on my waist, my body caught fire. I raised my head and looked into his eyes. He leaned down and whispered in my ear, "You can still run away, but do you want to run?" I didn't answer, because I knew I didn't want to run away that night. As we danced, Adrian's scent made me dizzy. Every time he moved his hands over my body, the way he gripped my hips as we danced, it erased all rational thoughts from my mind. Then suddenly he lifted my chin with his thumb and gave me a deep look. "Shall we go?" he said. There was an impatience in his voice, an order, and at that moment, my heart started beating like crazy. I didn't answer because Adrian already knew my decision. He grabbed my hand tightly and led me through the crowd to the exit of the bar. We were on our way to the hotel, and I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. As the streets of Vegas receded behind us, Adrian's hand gripped my wrist tightly. He seemed to be dragging me along, but I had already decided to leave. I didn't know what hotel he was staying at. I didn't care where we were going. Tonight, I had completely abandoned my logic. When Adrian pulled me to the entrance of a luxury hotel, the expensive cars parked by valets, the laughter echoing inside, and the chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings, all of it faded before my eyes. I was focused only on Adrian. I held my head up high so I wouldn't think about it anymore and went inside. Even the sound of my heels echoing on the marble floor of the lobby didn't sound like my own. There was a part of me that unconsciously wanted to go back, but Adrian's touch drowned out that thought. When we got into the elevator, neither of us spoke. Only his eyes were on me, and I wasn't avoiding them. There were only a few inches between us. I could feel the warmth of his skin. Just as we reached the floor, Adrian leaned down and whispered right next to my ears. "Are you scared?" Everything inside me was telling me to say yes, but I looked into his eyes and whispered, as if challenging him, "No." Was I really not afraid? I wasn't sure, but in that moment, fear was replaced by desire. When he opened the door, a large and luxurious suite greeted me. The city lights filtered in through the large windows, but there was only dim lighting inside the room. I took a few steps. The room was eerily isolated. Adrian came in behind me. Even the sound of him locking the door echoed in the room. He opened his shirt wide, took his watch off his wrist, and carefully placed it on the table. He kept his eyes on me the whole time, but I couldn't move. The heels of my shoes were embedded in the carpet, but I was fixed in place. He slowly approached me, and for the first time we were this close. "Won't you come in?" he whispered. I should have backed away, but I didn't. I took steps. I was unconscious now. Adrian tilted his head slightly to the side, and a dangerous curve formed on his lips as he looked at me. "You know, Olivia, it's easy to read your mind right now." I looked at him challengingly with my eyes. "And it's not hard to read your mind, Adrian." He smiled. He took another step. Our chests were almost touching. His hand slowly slid to my neck. Sparks exploded inside me when his fingers touched my skin. And when Adrian leaned down and bit my lip lightly, all the screaming inside me was silenced. I wanted him. I wanted to feel his touch on my skin and fill my body with only his self. And that night, I surrendered everything to Adrian. The pleasure he gave me was unbelievable. He knew every detail of me, almost flawlessly flying me from pleasure to pleasure. We were crazy in every corner of the hotel room. As I got lost in the night, I realized that Adrian had taken over not only my body, but also my mind. The hours with him were moments when I forgot even my own limits. But it wasn't just a night of passion. It was the beginning of something much bigger. When Adrian touched me, talked to me, looked into my eyes, he did everything consciously. I could just be lost in the moment. But he was watching me, and before I knew it, the game had already started. When I opened my eyes, the room was still dim. The curtains were tightly closed. I didn't know what time it was, but I felt the weight of the body next to mine. My skin still bore the traces of his touch. But now desire had given way to fear. What had I done? When I slowly turned my head, Adrian was already awake. He was leaning against the bed sipping his coffee, and he had that cynical, cold-blooded smile on his face. Adrian's voice echoed around the room. "Good morning, Olivia." At that moment, my heart skipped a beat. For seconds, my eyes focused on him. He must have noticed the fear in my eyes, the panic rising in me because he had that familiar wry smile on his face. I slowly lifted my head from the pillow, the curtains still tightly closed. I didn't know what time it was, but the heaviness I felt in my body still carried the traces of the night. What had I done? I still had traces of his touch on my skin. But worst of all, Adrian was watching me. I couldn't speak for a few seconds. All I wanted to do at that moment was to pack quickly and get out of here. Slowly, I tried to pull the covers off me and sit up, but Adrian's voice stopped me. "You look like you're in a hurry." My whole body tensed. His voice was calm, the calm of someone who knows too much. I swallowed. I have to go. My voice sounded weaker than I thought. Adrian took a sip of his coffee. His gaze was on me. Okay, Olivia, if you want to go, go. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of relief. But then Adrian put his coffee on the nightstand and continued calmly, his eyes on me. But first, you have to check your phone. Something inside me tightened with a freezing fear. Reflexively, I reached over the edge of the bed and picked up my phone. I swiped my finger to unlock the screen. Wrong password. For a moment, I thought I had pressed it wrong, so I tried again. Wrong. One more time. Wrong. My eyes widened. How did he do that? Boiling water poured over my head. That's when I realized Adrian was smiling, watching me. Your phone can't be broken, can it? I stared blankly at the screen, and an indescribable fear rose in me. Adrian casually stood up and took his own phone out of his pocket. And then he showed me that video. He showed us the moments of pleasure we experienced. Everything was recorded. My whole body froze. I lifted my eyes from the screen and looked at Adrian. What is this? I whispered, my voice shaking. Adrian calmly turned his phone around, played the video once more, and smiled at me. I'm just keeping our good memories, Olivia. It felt like a knife in my stomach. The fear rising inside me had reached an intolerable level. My whole body was shaking. Erase this, I said, my eyes wide, my breathing ragged. Adrian tilted his head slightly to the side. Oh, Olivia, really? Why would you want to destroy a memory like that? I glanced toward the door of the room for a moment. I could have run. But then Adrian spoke. You're thinking, aren't you? You're figuring out how to escape right now. My whole body froze. Adrian laughed lightly. But you're miscalculating. He reached into his pocket and pulled out my phone. My phone. If you're looking for this, I have it. I was like I'd been shot in the head. Adrian, you can't do this to me. Adrian squinted his eyes. He was watching me. Really? Because I already did it. My throat was dry. As he spoke, I quickly ran my eyes around the room. How could I get my phone? How could I get to the door? But Adrian had already seen all the options. Olivia. His voice was soft, but there was absolute authority in it. My whole body started to tremble. Sit down, I gasped. As if he had hypnotized me, I found myself sitting back on the bed. Adrian approached. He got down on his knees, his face close to mine. Now listen to me carefully. This video can remain a secret. But only if you give me what I want. I shook my head from side to side. What do you want? Adrian smiled slightly. He put his hand on my chin. He watched me, and a wild spark lit in his eyes. I shook my head from side to side. What do you want? Adrian smiled slightly. He put his hand on my chin. He watched me, and a wild spark lit in his eyes. I think you already know, Olivia. The moment I saw that cold, calculating look in Adrian's eyes, I felt completely empty inside. Why was he doing this? Why was he targeting me? Adrian rested his fingers on his chin and smiled slightly, watching the fear on my face. He knew he was intimidating me. What do you want? I said, my voice shaking. Slowly, he got up from his seat and walked towards me. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. Oh, Olivia. You finally asked the real question. I swallowed. He squeezed me to the edge of the bed. I couldn't escape. He put his hand gently on my shoulder, leaned close to my face, and whispered in that icy voice. You've started a game with me, Olivia, but you don't make the rules. My back was against the wall, my breath caught. Adrian continued. How much do you think you know about your husband? I froze for a moment. What does Daniel have to do with this? I whispered. Adrian laughed lightly. He has a lot more to do with it than you think. His lips moved closer, almost touching my neck. But this time, there was no passion, just a show of power. Daniel is my enemy, Olivia. My whole body tensed. Adrian tilted his head slightly to the side. And you were in the wrong place at the wrong time that night. But I have to admit, you took me by surprise. Are you using me? Adrian's eyes narrowed. There was a shred of amusement in them. Olivia, you're Daniel's greatest weakness. Why would I waste that? My knees began to shake. Are you going to tell him I betrayed him? Adrian shook his head from side to side. No. If I do that, the game will end immediately. I want something more fun. He put his hand on my chin, lifting my face up slightly. I want you on my side, Olivia. I tried to pull back in shock, but Adrian grabbed my wrist. Let go of me, I whispered, my voice shaky but angry. Adrian's smile widened. Don't ask me if you can let me go, Olivia, because you know I won't anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut. How was I going to get out of here? Adrian slowly pulled my phone out of his pocket and turned the screen back on. Remember, Olivia, this video can stay a secret, if you cooperate with me. My whole body felt like it was petrified. What if I don't agree? Adrian winked. Then I'll tell Daniel everything and you'll lose him for good. I closed my eyes. I was trapped, and there was no escape. When I returned from Vegas, it was like stepping into a different world. When my husband Daniel came to meet me at the airport, something inside me shattered as I looked at him. His eyes were still the same. His smile, his touch, everything was the same. But me? I wasn't the same Olivia anymore. I had betrayed her. And I hadn't just betrayed her. I had fallen into the trap of the wrong man. Adrian's breath was still on my neck. I didn't see him here in this city, but I felt his presence. When we got home, Daniel put his arms around my waist and pulled me to him. I missed you so much, he whispered in my ear. I winced. I felt like I had no right to even touch her. Daniel lifted his head, searching my eyes. Are you okay? My throat was dry. No, I wasn't okay. But I shook my head and said, I'm just tired. Daniel kissed me lightly on the lips. I have a surprise for you, he said. I invited my new business partner to dinner. I want you to meet him. It felt like a knife in my stomach. I gasped for breath. Who? I asked, my voice shaking. Daniel smiled. Adrian Harper. My whole world stopped. I closed my eyes tightly. This must be a nightmare. But it wasn't. That man in Vegas was my husband's business partner. This was Adrian's plan. He didn't find me there without recognizing me. He set me up on purpose. Now working directly with Daniel, he wanted complete control over me. How would I make eye contact with him at the dinner table? How far would he push me? As all these thoughts burned in my brain, Daniel grabbed my hand. Are you okay? Inside, I wanted to scream. Yes, I said, but my voice was barely a whisper. I knew it. This was going to be a battle, and I couldn't afford to lose. When Daniel went to work, I waited all day for a message from Adrian, but he didn't show up. It was like he started psychological warfare. He was cornering me step by step. But I couldn't wait for him, so I was going to wage war. First, I had to somehow get hold of the video of Adrian blackmailing me. I had to find something. I had to find out something about him. Everything about him. I turned on my computer and started doing research on Adrian Harper. The less information there was about him, the scarier he was. He was like a shadow. He had no social media accounts under his own name. But when I dug into old news archives, I found some information linking his name to another company, Harper Industries, and an old news story about an accident. Harper Industries founder Robert Harper went bankrupt 5 years ago in a case of corporate sabotage. Daniel Carter's company is allegedly behind the incident. I'm freezing. Adrian's father had been driven into bankruptcy by my husband. It made sense that Adrian would want revenge, but why had he chosen me? As I stared at the computer screen, I knew what I had to do. I had to find a way to erase the video Adrian had. I couldn't let him hurt Daniel. I wasn't going to give in to Adrian. But there was a problem. Adrian was a much stronger and smarter man than I had ever imagined. He wasn't going to be easy to beat. I could never let Adrian back me into a corner. He wanted to use me as a pawn, but he didn't know who would run the game. Running away was no longer an option. I had to beat him. If I failed, Daniel would find out everything, and my life would be ruined forever. I would do whatever it took to prevent that. After dinner with Daniel, I got a text from Adrian. "You're coming to see me tonight at 10 o'clock. If not, I'll tell Daniel everything tomorrow." As I looked at the screen, my hand was shaking. This couldn't go on like this. Adrian would never let me go. If I went to him and surrendered, it would be his victory. But if I refused, Daniel would find out everything. For the first time, I really thought I'd lost. But then, I realized something. Adrian was challenging me because he was still sure he was going to win, and I had to change the game. If Adrian was so confident in me, I could use his confidence to my advantage. He thought he was setting me up, but this time I was going to set a trap for him. That night, I went to him like I was supposed to. But this time, I was different. The weak, frightened Olivia was gone. When she opened the door, she looked into my eyes. "I knew you'd come." "Of course I came," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. Adrian smiled slightly and pulled me inside, but I had already made my last move on him. I approached him, looked him in the eyes. "So, what do you want, Adrian?" I said, not narrowing my eyes. The smile on Adrian's face grew even bigger. "You know that, Olivia." Slowly, he leaned into my face, but this time I didn't resist him. He put his fingers on my chin, moving closer to my face. But that's when he heard the door open. Adrian quickly turned around. Daniel was standing in the doorway. "How did you find me?" Adrian growled. Daniel's eyes were glowing with anger. I savored my victory looking at Adrian. "I told you something, Adrian," I said softly. "You never know who will win this game." Adrian's expression changed. For the first time, he seemed to lose control. Daniel was silent, but the anger in his eyes was clear. Adrian took a step towards the door, then turned to me. "You think you got me?" he whispered. At that moment, something inside me tightened again. Adrian leaned toward me and whispered in a voice only I could hear. "Olivia, this is not over." And in that moment, I didn't know if it was really over. Do you think Olivia really won, or will Adrian come back? Was what Olivia did the right thing? Do you think she should have told Daniel the truth? What do you think Adrian's last words mean? Is it really over? If you were Olivia, what kind of trap would you have set for Adrian? Should there be more to this story? What else do you think could happen between Olivia and Adrian? Did this story draw you in? If you want more of such stunning stories of betrayal, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications to be instantly notified of new videos. I'm waiting for your thoughts on the story in the comments. Do you think Olivia is really free, or will Adrian come back? See you in the next stunning story.
I'm Susan Mitchell. I'm 52 years old. I have long, wavy chestnut hair. My green eyes are tired from the years, but still vibrant. My skin is smooth as porcelain, but full of the marks of time. When I was young, I was a woman who attracted attention. But over the years, the responsibilities of being a mother and then a wife took me away from being myself. I have been faithful all my life. I sacrificed everything for my husband and children. I made our house a home. I put my own dreams aside for Rick's career. For 30 years, I was the perfect wife, or so I thought. But one day, my life was shattered by a text message. When I saw that message on Rick's phone, something inside me snapped. "I can't wait for tonight. Your wife will never know." But what was that? Will was standing in the doorway staring at me. He looked tired, but there was something else in his eyes. I hesitantly motioned for him to come in, and he went in without speaking. A moment of silence. Will looked around with his eyes. He tripped over the wine bottle, but he didn't say anything. I didn't know what to do. I turned to him, tried to mumble a few words, but nothing came out. Finally, I could only say one sentence, stifling the silent screams inside me. "Rick is cheating on me, Will!" Will's whole face changed. His expression, which had already seemed to anticipate this, now turned to anger, but he was still in control. He waited a few seconds to digest what he had heard, so as not to hurt me. Then he asked in a very calm but deep voice, "How do you know that?" something inside me broke. I collapsed on the couch. I ran my hands through my hair. My phone was still on the table. The desire to show the message was mixed with the fear of showing it. But I couldn't hide the truth anymore. I picked up the phone and turned the screen to Will. "Emily, I can't wait for tonight. Your wife will never know." Will stared at the screen for a few seconds. His face was like stone. Then he narrowed his eyes. "When did you find out?" "Last night." It felt like a knife in my chest. My hands trembled. I wanted to look away, but the words on the screen were already seared into my mind. I had been faithful to Rick for 30 years. And what about him? He was cheating on me with his 25-year-old assistant. Two things were going through me at that moment: pain and anger. But I had to ask the question, what was I going to do next? That was the moment when everything changed. Was I going to act in anger and force Rick to confront me? Would I go quietly and get out of my life? Or take revenge? What hurt me the most was that I couldn't share this with anyone. My children were grown up. I couldn't tell them. My friends? No. No one could know that my marriage was a lie. My eyes fell on the phone. It was past midnight. Thoughts were running through my head. Was Rick with Emily right now? Didn't he know I noticed this message? Or did he not care anymore? My insides were clenching. I'd been faithful all these years, and look what I'd gotten in return. But I couldn't share it with anyone. I couldn't tell anyone. My husband cheated on me. I couldn't. I stopped for a moment. Maybe I could tell someone. I picked up the phone. A number popped up on the screen. Will, my husband's brother, Will, who for years had been quiet, calm, always one step behind. Why did I need him? Why had I thought of him? As the phone vibrated in my hand, the voice inside me kept trying to stop me. "Don't do this, Susan. What you and Rick have is none of Will's business. What will change if Will finds out?" But there was another voice inside me. "But you're alone, Susan. You're about to lose your temper. You need to talk to someone about this. And Will, he won't hurt you." With that in mind, I took a deep breath and tapped the phone screen. I called Will's number. A single ringtone. 2, 3. Finally, a tired but confused voice came from across the room. "Will." "Susan?" I didn't know what to say for a moment. "Will, I'm not disturbing you, am I?" My voice was shaking. I could hear the sound of deep breathing coming from across the room. "Will, of course not. Is everything okay?" How could I answer that question? Was everything okay? My eyes fell on the bottle of wine on the table. I need to talk. Will fell silent. There was a long silence. Then his voice softened. "Will, where are you?" I swallowed. "I'm in the Hamptons." Will's breathing grew heavy. There was a pause between sentences. Then he said what I had been waiting for. "Okay, hold on. I'm coming." An hour had passed. I was walking all over the house, fighting a big battle inside myself. What would I say to him? Would he judge me? Or would he really listen? The wine was gone, but my head was still drunk. Just when my inner voice was about to talk me out of it, there was a knock at the door. I froze. I stood up and walked slowly to the door. When I opened the door, there was Will. He was wearing simple jeans and a gray sweater, but just seeing him so ordinary made something inside me tremble. His eyes locked on mine. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other. And that's when I realized Will wasn't here just to listen to me. "And did you say anything to him?" I laughed bitterly, as if boiling water had poured over my head. "No, Will, I didn't confront him because I didn't know what to say." Will took a deep breath and clenched his knees in his hands. "For him to do that after all these years," he said through his teeth, "I could never do that to him." "You couldn't do it to him, huh?" "Neither could I. But he did it." Looking down at his glass of wine. How old was I when I first met you? I was surprised. Where had this come from? I frowned. I don't know, 20 maybe? He shook his head from side to side. He smiled slightly, but there was something bitter in it. 18. I was 18 when my brother first brought you home. He raised his wine glass. He gave me a strange look, and the first time I saw you... We were both silent for a while. The clock was ticking, but the silence was not uncomfortable. Will pointed to the wine glass on the table. Got any more? I poured him some more, then took a glass for myself. The more wine we drank, the deeper our conversations became. At first we were just talking about Rick's betrayal, but then... At one point, Will started talking about the past. You know, Susan, and he said, I admired you. I almost dropped the glass in my hand when I heard that. I felt a strange warmth inside me. What did he mean? The way he looked at me at that moment, it was different. But I was tired, sad, and I didn't want to think about it. Will, tonight, please. It's not about me, it's about Rick. Will smiled, but there was a deep sadness behind his smile. Yes, it's about Rick. And he swallowed those words. I really don't understand how he could do this to you. And he didn't take his eyes off me as he said it. And that's when the first spark lit inside me. Had he just come to listen to me? Or was there something else he was hiding from me? But tonight, I didn't want to find the answers to those questions. It was getting close to dawn. Will's eyes were tired, but he still didn't seem to want to leave me. We walked to the door. I was going to see him off, but there was a strange uneasiness inside me. Did I not want him to go? I didn't know. I opened the door and the cold night air rushed in. Will straightened his coat. He looked into my eyes one last time. Susan, he said, his voice almost a whisper. You can always count on me. I shivered inside. For a few seconds, I approached him without realizing what was happening. I just wanted to kiss him lightly on the cheek to say goodbye. But at that moment, Will leaned into me, and our lips met for a few seconds. But then we both pulled back in surprise. What had we done? We locked eyes. Inside me, something snapped, but it was a mistake, wasn't it? After that kiss on the doorstep that night, I should have pretended nothing had happened. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I thought about was Will's lips. No! I quickly pulled myself together. It was just a moment. It was wrong. I shouldn't have seen him again. I told myself that over and over again, but why was my heart still pounding like crazy? Rick, he still didn't know anything. Everything was normal at home, as if he hadn't cheated on me, as if he hadn't said to another woman, I can't wait for tonight. Every night he'd come home and kiss me, smiling, as if nothing had happened, but now disgust was rising in me. Every time I looked into your eyes, I saw only betrayal, and worst of all, when I closed my eyes, I saw Will instead. I kept making excuses to myself. He just wanted to comfort me. He was just a good person. I was too sensitive and I misunderstood, but I was tired of lying. The truth is, Will made me feel like a woman for the first time, and it was creating a storm inside me. I shouldn't have called Will. But when my finger touched, I wanted to forget that night. So I tried to distract myself, but everything was coming back to him. I picked up the phone. Will's number was on the screen. You shouldn't call, but my finger had already touched it. Stolen. My heart was about to burst. But then I got a message on the phone. Rick, I'm busy tonight. I'll be late. And at that moment, I resigned myself to my fate. My eyes lingered on Will's name. And then I pressed dial. And I waited. Susan? As soon as I heard his voice, a strange warmth spread through me. It was like I was waiting for her to pick up the phone. But I quickly remembered I had to pull myself together. Will, hi. There was silence for a moment. Then his voice became softer. and more sincere. "I've been waiting for your call." My heart raced. Was he waiting? I didn't want to ask, but he continued. "Are you okay? How are you?" I took a deep breath. This question, like he wasn't just asking about that night, he really wanted to know how I was doing. And the worst part was, I didn't even know how I was. "How about you come see me?" Will's voice was on the other end of the phone, expectant and cautious. I was surprised. 1,000 thoughts ran through my head in a matter of seconds. Was it a good idea to see him? But I wanted to. As my inner turmoil grew, I realized that the only thing that could comfort me was to be with him. "Yes," I said slowly. "Let's meet." "Where?" A strange confidence built up inside me. "At my place." Will paused for a brief moment, then his voice was soft but with a deep meaning. "Okay. Uh-huh. When should I come over?" "Tonight." Hearing my own words, I felt a warmth inside me, mixed with a cold chill. Was I really doing this? But Rick wouldn't be home tonight. I already knew where he was. He's with Emily again. I felt angry inside. Why should I stay at home while she's out with her boyfriend? When I hung up the phone, my heart was pounding. Will. He wanted to see me, and I wanted to see him. Hours later, when the doorbell rang, I held my breath. Will was standing in the doorway. He was wearing a dark suit. Classic, but suited him perfectly. For a moment, our eyes locked. It was like we were both thinking the same thing. Then I recovered quickly and opened the door. "Come in." When Will stepped inside, a strange excitement filled me. I poured 2 glasses of wine in the kitchen, and we started talking about superficial things at first. But we both knew we couldn't escape that night without talking about it. Finally, when the silence grew heavy, Will took a deep breath and looked at me. "Susan, I couldn't forget that night." My eyes locked on him. I should have said it, but he had said it. I swallowed. What was I supposed to say? "Really?" I said, my voice shaking. Will cocked his head. It wasn't just a moment for me. The breath stopped inside me. As I stared at him, something I hadn't expected happened. "Susan, I've been in love with you for years." The world shook for a moment. What? Was he really saying that? I blinked my eyes. I choked on the words. Will's eyes were deep and sincere. "Susan, I've been in love with you for years." Those words echoed in my head. For years? For what? Will had always been Rick's brother to me. Strong, successful, kind, but always family. I never realized he felt this way about me. A warmth spread through me. But this had to be a mistake, right? As I struggled with my inner voice, Will looked away as if regretting his words. "Susan, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that." For the first time, he was hesitant, a little worried. But I wondered, when the man I loved all these years was cheating on me, was the other man in love with me? For how long? How had it happened? I cleared my throat, my voice a little shaky. "You say, for years? How long?" Will took a sip of his wine, exhaled deeply. "I guess, since the first day I met you." A strange shiver ran through me. "But why didn't you ever tell me?" He didn't avert his eyes. She was determined. "Because you were Rick's wife." I let out a laugh, but it was a bitter laugh. I shook my head, turned the glass in my hand. "Funny, isn't it?" I said bitterly. "I thought of myself as Rick's wife for 30 years, but he'd already left me." Will looked at me. There was compassion and sadness and something else in his eyes. "Susan, you don't deserve this." For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone really saw me. But inside, I was a mess. What was I doing? Was it the booze? The late hour? Or was it because, for the first time, I felt truly desired? But deep inside me, deep down, I realized that I had always felt it. Later in the night, control was being lost. As the hours passed, the conversations deepened. I opened up for the first time. I told him how Rick had neglected me, how he didn't care, how he made me feel like it was all over by itself. And Will told me how he'd been repressing it all these years. And for the first time, I felt really wanted. I realized how Will was looking at me, the way he looked at me, like Rick hadn't looked at me in years. Our wine glasses were empty, the words slowed. Our breaths became audible as the silence stretched. He looked at me as I looked at him. "Susan," he said in a low voice. He had only said my name, but his eyes said more than words. I didn't think, I just felt. My own hand was reaching for Will's. I didn't stop Will from approaching me. Our faces were so close. I could feel his breath. And then, our lips met. At first it was light, but then it became more intense, more passionate. My hand slid to his chest. I felt his hands on my waist. I hadn't felt anything like that for a long time. And then I realized, for the first time, I really felt like a woman. Despite my advancing age, he was exploring my uncharted territory like an adventurer, and I was experiencing pleasures that Rick had never given me until this age. All the confusion inside me, all the logic, all the questions were silenced. I didn't want to think about tonight. I just wanted to feel. And in that moment, I gave myself to Will. What happens now? Was this night between Susan and Will a mistake, or the result of an inevitable passion? Waking up in the dim light of the morning sun with a man beside her. But he's not her husband. A storm was brewing inside Susan. Now, she had to face the truth. But which truth? Was this revenge or true love? Should Susan try to forget this night as a mistake? Or should she rewrite her life? What will Rick do if he finds out the truth? Will he throw Susan away and leave, or will he fight to keep her? Is Will really the right person for her, or is he just a reflection of her anger at Rick? Susan has suffered in silence for years, but what should she do now? Should she fall back on years of habit or forge her own path? What would you do? What is the right decision for Susan? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more of this story. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our new stories. Can sometimes the greatest betrayal lead us to the greatest love? We are waiting for your comments.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Life Sketches channel. My name is Emily, I'm 22 years old, I have white skin, red hair, and I'm often described as attractive. Today I'm going to tell you the most complicated and secretive story of my life. Please don't judge me. I'm not happy with the situation I'm in, but I can't help how I feel. Family always seems like a safe harbour, but sometimes that harbour can be filled with unexpected secrets and emotions. What about you? What would you do in such a situation? Share with me in the comments. It all started during the pandemic. It was a time when we all stayed indoors and there was chaos around the world. For me, this process was even more complicated. My girlfriend and I were fighting all the time. The quarantine period turned both the world and my mood upside down. I went on vacation with my brother Chris and his wife Natalie. My brother was always a hero to me, a protective, reassuring figure, always there for me. It was good for me to stay with them in this chaotic situation. But one day, during a conversation with my mother, I learned that Chris was not actually my brother, that I was not my parents' natural child, that they had adopted me when I was very young. Learning this truth created a different storm inside me. Everything in the world was closing in on me. The only thing that was good for me was Chris, who I had known as my brother, but now I found out was my half-brother. My view of Chris slowly began to change. Chris was 29 years old, tall, muscular, well-groomed, handsome, and charismatic. During the lockdown, when we were all stuck at home, I started spending more time with Chris, especially at night, playing PUBG together. Our passion for gaming brought us closer. Meanwhile, the distance between him and me started to close more and more. However, as we both realized this, we were consciously trying to take a step back. Little hints began to appear between us as we played games throughout the night. At one point during the game, I asked, "Do you need a special talent to be so good, or are you just naturally so charming?" which caused us both to burst out laughing. But even though it seemed like an innocent joke, I could feel the underlying meaning of what I was saying. Another night, after we had won a game, Chris turned to me and said, "It's always more fun to play with you. I'm not as comfortable with others, and spending my nights with you gives me a different kind of rush." I felt a strange stirring inside me, but I quickly tried to change the subject. "I'm just a lucky player, bro," I said with a laugh. But when our gazes met for a moment, we both knew that this moment was anything but ordinary. I was storming inside. I was drawn to Chris. I couldn't help my feelings. I was on fire with him. One night, I was playing PUBG by myself in the living room, wearing just my underwear. It was a moment when I was comfortable like that. I was jumping up and down with the excitement of the game, having fun shooting guys. Suddenly, I saw Chris in the corner of the door. He was watching me from there. When he realized I saw him, he said, "I didn't want to bother you. You were having so much fun. I came over to play with you, but when I saw you like that, I couldn't stop watching." Chris closed the distance between us even closer. "Emily, I've never had the chance to get to know you this well before, but the more I get to know you, the more I realize how special you are. Games are just an excuse. It feels so good to be with you, to spend time with you. I feel very happy and peaceful around you," he said. These words both made me proud and complicated the feelings inside me, but I still chose to remain silent. For a few days, this silent attraction continued. Our conversations, our games, and the time we spent together became more and more private. The contact between us was no longer innocent. At night, when he kissed me goodnight and kissed my cheek, I had butterflies inside me. I wanted him so much, and I could tell that he felt the same way, but we knew how wrong this connection was. Finally, one night, we were lying in the room again, playing a game. I was wearing my nightgown, and I had nothing on. Without realizing it, my nightgown was opened, and my body was completely naked. Suddenly, I looked at Chris. He wasn't looking at the game, he was looking at me. I caught him watching me, and I realized that my nightgown was open. I quickly recovered and closed the game. I turned to him and asked, "Chris, did something happen?" He closed the game, looked at me and took a deep breath. "Emily, I want to tell you something, but it's hard to find the right words," he said. My heart started to race. "What do you mean?" I asked, but my voice was shaking. Chris said, "I know these feelings are weird, but it's getting harder and harder to ignore it. I want you with all my being," he said. At that moment, I felt both fear and a strange relief. Chris slowly sat down next to me, put one hand on my private part between my legs, put his other hand in my hair, and kissed my lips madly. I was breathless. Chris and I had an uncontrollable attraction that night in the living room. Later that night, we surrendered to each other in satellites. It's impossible to describe the excitement and passion of those moments. In the morning, Chris got up and went back to his wife Natalie. I was alone in my bed, thinking about what had happened. I knew how wrong what we had done was, but the feelings inside me were so intense. I couldn't stop the bond between Chris and I from developing in this way. That morning, the silence was stronger than anything else. When our eyes met at breakfast, we both felt the weight of what had happened. Meanwhile, the bond between Chris and I was growing stronger every day. Every night he would come over to play PUBG. We would be together while Natalie slept in the room, and the brief glances and small touches we gave each other at home would increase the tension between us. But I thought Natalie didn't notice, but I was wrong. One afternoon, Chris was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and I went over to help him. Our hands reached for the knives at the same time, and for a brief moment our eyes met. My heart started to race. Chris took a deep breath and leaned towards me. We surrendered to each other in the middle of the kitchen, forgetting that Natalie was home at the time. Suddenly I felt a chill behind me and turned around. Natalie was standing in the doorway, not knowing what to do. What does this mean?" she asked. Her tone was calm but questioning. Chris and I didn't know what to say, but Natalie soon chose to ignore it, saying, "I've been feeling this for a long time and I'd like to join you." Our relationship had taken on a whole new dimension. Natalie's ignorance of the situation seemed to put me at ease at first, but things started to get more complicated. Our bond was no longer limited to Chris and me. Natalie had become part of the equation too, but that didn't make it any easier to suppress my feelings or forget what had happened. On the contrary, it made me want Chris even more. During the quarantine, a complex bond developed between the three of us. Natalie was trying to maintain her marriage to Chris, while at the same time trying to control her situation with me. However, maintaining this three-way relationship was not easy. Although Natalie sometimes seemed cool and accepting, I could feel the jealousy and conflicts growing inside her. My bond with Chris was made even more difficult by Natalie's presence. I wanted to share every moment with him, but Natalie's presence always interrupted those moments. The idea of sharing Chris with Natalie sent a wave of jealousy and anger through me. I wanted him all to myself. One evening, I saw Natalie naked on Chris's lap, naked in their embrace as they kissed. At that moment, a wave of jealousy rose up inside me. I felt that Chris should belong to me. The moments he shared with Natalie made me uneasy. I found it hard to control myself. Eventually, we realized that this relationship was unsustainable. Chris, Natalie and I came together and decided to end it. But this decision left me with a huge emptiness and regret. The connection between Chris and me was real, but it was both false and destructive. This story is etched in my memory as the most complicated and unforgettable period of my life. I had looked at Chris as an older brother for years, but finding out that he didn't have the same blood as me changed everything. My attraction to him took on a completely different dimension with this knowledge. Natalie's involvement made things even more complicated. My feelings for Chris were real, but this relationship destroyed me and those around me. Looking back now, I still find it hard to understand what I did, but I'm sharing this story with you for a reason. To know that I'm not alone, and to share my feelings with you to ease them a little. What about you? What would you do if you found out that the person you were in love with was someone you once knew as family? How would you control your feelings if you had to share him or her with someone else? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories.
Sometimes it's not a major catastrophe that changes your life. Sometimes it just takes one offer. I'm Emma. I'm 30 years old. I was an ordinary married woman. My life was hard, but I was a decent person. I thought so. Until one night, a man offered me $50,000. Just one night, a one-night mistake. Doesn't make me an immoral woman, does it? But at that moment, there was something I didn't know. After I got that money, nothing would ever be the same. I was a different person. So, how did I get here? What led me down this path? And this is where my story begins. I'm Emma. I'm 30 years old. My long, wavy chestnut hair falls to my shoulders and my skin is always smooth. My light green eyes had a deep but cool gaze. Every outfit I wore revealed the perfect lines of my body. People turned their heads when they saw me. Women envied me. Men couldn't take their eyes off me. But the truth is, beauty alone means nothing. I thought beauty would bring me luck, but it didn't protect me. It didn't feed me. It didn't make me happy. On the outside, everyone envied me, but no one knew who I really was. No one knew the questions I asked myself in the mirror when I came home in the evenings. My marriage was presented to me like a fairy tale. My husband Daniel was the man who once promised me the world. When he met me, there was passion in his eyes, as if all he wanted was to make me happy. But over time, everything changed. In the first years, everything was fine. I was in love with him, and he with me. But as time passed, he started to lose interest. First, he started forgetting small details. Then, he gave all his attention to his work. By the time he came home in the evening, we had nothing to talk about. His eyes, which once looked at me with admiration, were now locked on the TV or the phone screen. Did he still love me? Or had I, too, become the background music of his life? And then, financial difficulties began. Debts piled up, credit cards maxed out, Daniel lost his job, and after a while, he just stayed at home and did nothing. He spent his days in front of the TV with a beer bottle in his hand. I, on the other hand, worked every day to survive. I worked as a waiter in the bar of a luxury hotel, serving the women who came every day dressed in diamonds, the men who sipped expensive whiskey, the customers who smiled politely when they saw me, but ignored people like me. Sometimes one of them would compliment me. "What beautiful eyes you have. Why don't you go to a better place instead of working in this hotel?" But nothing ever changed. In the evening, I'd go home, and Daniel would be on the couch. The place is a mess. The bills are still unpaid. Every night I would fall asleep with the same thought. Don't I deserve better than this? That night, when I was lost in these thoughts, I saw him. That night, everything changed. That night, working under the dim lights of the hotel, I saw him for the first time. Victor DeLuca. The moment he stepped into the room, the energy changed. People began to whisper softly. The waiters unconsciously became more attentive. He ignored it all and walked slowly towards the bar. He was tall, his dark hair perfectly combed. The first 2 buttons of his shirt were undone. He wore a smart suit without a tie. Every detail, from his watch and shoes to the bracelet on his wrist, showed that he had planned everything down to the last detail. He was not an ordinary rich man, but that wasn't the only thing that made him different. His eyes. He was watching me with a calm but menacing expression. Most customers would have ordered their drinks and gone off to their own conversations, but Victor DeLuca was studying me. He was weighing things. After a while, a waiter's voice came from behind me. "Emma, the customer in the corner wants to buy his drink from you." It wasn't a strange request. I knew I attracted most male customers, but I still felt a strange stirring inside me. I turned my head slightly to look. Victor was leaning comfortably back in his chair, swirling the glass of whiskey he held in his hand in slow motion. When his eyes locked on mine, a slight but confident smile appeared on his face. I didn't know what he was trying to do, but it was part of the job, so I held my head high, took a deep breath, picked up my tray, and walked over to his desk. Little did I know at that moment that my life would never be the same again. When I approached his table, he didn't take his eyes off me for a moment. He was so relaxed, as if it was the most natural thing in his life to sit here and wait for me. As I put my tray on the table, he got to the point without hesitation. "I asked you to serve because I want to see everyone's faces, to know everything about this place. I need to have an opinion about everyone." His voice was deep and calm, choosing each word carefully. I looked up slightly as he poured his whiskey into the glass. "Is that so? Then is there anything else you want to know about the hotel, Mr. I noticed the slight flicker in his eyes. I was testing the limits, but he seemed to enjoy it. "DeLuca," he said. "But names are unimportant. There are ways to understand people better." I lifted the wine bottle and touched his whiskey. "And what did you learn about me?" He smiled. "Very little yet." I held out my hand, ready to take the tray and walk away, when his voice stopped me. "Emma." There was something strange about the way she said my name. I turned to her slowly. "Do you know me?" Her smile got a little deeper. "No, I don't, but I will." I felt that this moment had lasted strangely too long. I wouldn't have had a conversation like this with a normal customer, but Victor DeLuca was not normal. Somehow he already seemed to have the upper hand over me. I bowed my head slightly and replied with a distant smile, "Good evening to you, Mr. DeLuca," and I turned and walked away. But even as I left, I couldn't deny the weight of his gaze on my back. That night, I realized he was interested in me, but what I didn't know was that he had already found out everything about me. When I opened my eyes in the morning, the silence in the house hit me like a heavy stone. Daniel wasn't with me, but that was nothing new. I sat up in bed and looked at my watch. How many mornings had I woken up thinking about overdue bills? How many nights had I fallen asleep without finding a solution? I went into the kitchen and saw Daniel sitting in front of the TV. Not even breakfast in front of him, just a beer in his hand at this early hour of the morning. He thought he had put it down hard on the table so it wouldn't make any noise, but I had noticed. I took a deep breath and went into the kitchen. "Daniel, the bills are still unpaid. The electricity is about to be cut off. The credit cards are maxed out. We can't even make the rent." Daniel didn't even take his eyes off the TV. "Emma, I don't want to deal with this in the morning." I put my hands on the table, trying to suppress my anger. "You don't want to deal with it? This is our life, Daniel. I work every day. I take care of you. I do everything on my own. What do you do? Nothing." At that moment, he turned his eyes to me. There was still a look of indifference in his eyes. "I'm not doing anything?" He put the beer bottle aside and gave a mocking laugh. "I'm working, Emma, but things are bad right now. There's no need for you to panic so much." "I'm panicking?" I couldn't control my voice. "Daniel, I work every day. How can I not panic when the debts are piling up?" He crossed his arms and shook his head. "If you're that uncomfortable, quit. We'll find a way." At that moment, something inside me snapped. I realized I was with a man who took no responsibility for his own life. "We'll figure it out, right?" I whispered. I squeezed my hands and took a deep breath. "You know what, Daniel? I'm so tired of having this conversation with you. You don't really want to find a solution, you just want time to pass. But I don't want to wait anymore. I turned around and he murmured behind me as I walked out the kitchen door, thinking I hadn't heard him. Sometimes you overreact, Emma. When I heard that sentence, all the anger and frustration inside me was about to explode like a volcano. But I didn't turn to him and say anything, because there was no point in talking to him anymore. I grabbed my coat and closed the door hard and went out to go to the hotel. When I got to work, I was trying to clear my head. I went into the kitchen, got my coffee, looked in the mirror. I had black circles under my eyes from exhaustion. I felt like an idiot, and worst of all, I was stuck. I took a deep breath and stepped into the luxurious lobby of the hotel. I had to focus on my work, but at that moment, my eyes involuntarily searched for him. Victor DeLuca. He was sitting in his usual place in the corner, but this time it was different. This time he seemed to be waiting for me. His eyes were directly on me, just like last night. One of the waiters approached me. "Emma, DeLuca wants you to serve again." Normally I wouldn't have minded, but this time there was a strange nervousness in me. I took a deep breath and looked up before looking at him. Victor was sitting there, as if patiently waiting for me to step in. I slowly picked up the tray and made my way to his desk. This time I had prepared myself. When I placed the glass in front of him, his voice was deep and clear. "What kind of morning is it?" I squinted my eyes slightly. "I just started my workday, Mr. DeLuca." He smiled. "Me too." Without taking his eyes off me, he gestured to the chair next to him. "Sit down." I hesitated for a moment. This was my workplace.